I will verify if everything is good.
Yep, looks good to me.
But nothing changed. I don't know why this. Because you know, I have other channel in Polish.
Yeah.
And this channel in English is my new. So okay, everything is good. It's work.
Well, it's good you have a channel in English now, because I'll send the link to your channel to my viewers, and hopefully a lot of them will subscribe to you too. I think they'll find it interesting, Polish communists.
Yes, it is my objective.
Yeah.
So today we are speaking with Donald Carter.
Hello.
Hello. You are American who lived in Moscow, and
yes.
my first question for you is why you are starting the learning Russian language, because in Poland socialist we have in every school the Russian teachers, the teachers of the Russian language, and Polish people didn't like this. They said that we are in the Red Army occupation, and we have to learn Russian. And when the socialism was collapsed, we are free, and now we are don't learning Russian language. And you are have your education in United States without Russian occupation. So why did you start the learning Russian language?
Well, it all started actually with my my coming to communist conclusions about history and politics and economics and everything, which actually happened to me in school when we were learning the same thing as you guys, as you were just talking about. We were learning about the history of the Soviet Union, the history of socialist revolutions at the beginning of the 20th century. And just a lot of stuff they said didn't make sense to me. I started researching on my own, and eventually it led me to socialist conclusions. And I realized that it was impossible to understand and get the full picture of what the Soviet Union was, what socialism in the Eastern Bloc was, without speaking Russian, because the sources that are only available in English are mostly ones that, you know, the mainstream bourgeois academia have purposely published, have purposely translated, and a lot of it is just propaganda, you know. So I wanted to move to Russia specifically to improve my Russian, because I think the only way to speak a language, to get it to a fluent level, is to go somewhere, of course, where everyone is speaking the actual language. So I came here to do that, and to expose myself to Soviet sources in Russian. I wanted to go to, like, you know, the state library of Russia. It's called the Lenin Library. And there's tons of books there about the Soviet history, the Soviet Union in Russian, written in the Soviet Union. I wanted to be able to read those, and now I can. Now I have like a fluent proficiency in Russian. I've even become a Russian citizen. So now I'm not just an American living in Moscow. I'm also a Russian citizen. And yeah, so this is the reason why I came to Russia. And actually, you know, what ended up happening exceeded my expectations. I found a job at Russia Today. They really liked my perspectives and my work as a correspondent, and so I became a correspondent at RT and started this YouTube channel because I thought a lot of people would be interested in the West about what's going on in Russia, what people are like, Soviet history, all that. And one of my first videos, when I talked to people who lived in the Soviet Union, called "Does Socialism Work?" So former Soviet citizens speak about their life under socialism. This video exploded. It's got almost 200,000 views, and I don't even have 5,000 subscribers. So, so yeah, this is really why I started learning Russian, because I wanted to learn the truth about the history of socialism. I wanted to learn both sides, and you know, I think learning is a lifelong pursuit. So I'm still doing it, but I've come a long way since then.
So you are proof that all this propaganda that we have in Poland, that now we are free and the people from the east have to emigrate to west to find the job. You are emigrate from the west to the east, and you are like me, the migrant worker.
Yeah, I'm a migrant worker to Russia from America. And to be honest, I think if more Americans realized that if they came to Russia, they would find actually greater opportunities than in America itself, there would be a lot more people here from America. But the propaganda in America about Russia, how it's an evil, terrible, poor place, like you don't want to go there, it keeps people away. But because of my political views, because of what I wanted to accomplish, I was able to see through that nonsense, you know.
Okay, so now I want to ask you about your what do you think about the KPRF, Communist Party of the Russian Federation? I interviewed the Ben Burgess with USA. He was from the party DSA, and if you can compare these two parties, KPRF to the DSA and the left in America.
Yeah, I can make comparisons and contrasts. Well, first I should mention that most socialists in the U.S. who've never been to Russia don't know that much about the KPRF. Just see the KPRF as usually some Stalinist party. This is what most of the Trotskyists in America think about it. When I came to Russia, what I realized is that the Russian left is actually in a bit of a similar situation as the Western left, which I didn't expect. I thought they were going to be more unified and everything, but I mean, they're after all living under the same. They're after all living under the capitalist system, just as people in the West are. And the West in Russia is fragmented, but the KPRF is by far the most popular party, and they're not just like some monolithic Stalinist party. I mean, there's different people in the KPRF. There's people from, people who celebrate the legacy of Stalin. There's also social democrats like in DSA in the United States. There's people in the middle. I mean, there's a lot of political orientations on the left that are represented in the KPRF. Now, I guess the similarities that we could talk about between the DSA and the KPRF is that they're both working within the legal framework of the system that exists in both countries. Like DSA is not calling for revolutionary overthrow of the American government. They run candidates actually through the Democratic Party, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others who were members of DSA now are representatives of the Democratic Party, which is, of course, a bourgeois party. But the KPRF also runs candidates, their own candidates, though, through the parliamentary system in Russia. And Revolution is not off of their party program, but they are definitely a legal parliamentary party that does mostly parliamentary work. Now, I would say that they're not so comparable to the kind of petty bourgeoisie that supports Biden because of the fact that the bourgeoisie in Russia and the bourgeoisie in the United States are in very different positions. I think the United States bourgeoisie is, the main, the center of Western imperialism, that's run by the big banks that wants to exploit the world's resources and everything. In Russia, of course, there's a bourgeois class that came to power after the fall of the Soviet Union as well. But this bourgeois class is actually right now, having a struggle with the bourgeois classes of the West. The Western bourgeoisie wants to take Russia's resources, turn it into a country that it was back in the 1990s, when any Western banker could come in and buy up the property of the state, buy up the country's resources and factories, and just sell it off for some speculative profit. The bourgeoisie in Russia is interested in obviously making profit just like any other capitalist, but they're interested in defending their own profits against that of the West. So I would say that there's a conflict of interest between the two bourgeois classes here, and in that case, the DSA working within the legal framework of a political system that is the mechanism of imperialism, while the KPRF has taken a stance that, for the sake of national preservation against imperialism, for now, we need to, work within this current system. This is their temporary strategy. So I think the similarity would go as far as that the KPRF works in the legal system just like DSA, but they're working within different legal systems within the context of geopolitics right now, I would say.
Could you say something more about the Stalinism in the KPRF? Because this is the subject which me interests the most. For the period of the Soviet Union, I think that the period when the Stalin was in that he was the first Marxist in the history who built socialism, and your flat is also built by the time of Stalin.
That's correct.
Yes, I know this from your channel, and it shows that it was very, very serious. In Poland now, when they construct buildings, after 10 years you have to renovate them because this is very, very cheap and not very bon quality. But these buildings built in the time of Stalin was huge but my question is that the Communist Party of the Soviet Union after 1956 was de-Stalinized. They didn't like Stalin, Khrushchev, and the people like this, and all this contribution which was in Soviet Union was made by the members of the party, like Yeltsin, like Gorbachev, and the first bourgeoisie in Russia. It is the member of the ancient Communist Party. So, for you think that the Stalinism in the KPRF, it is only the symbol that they show the icon with Stalin, or they are, because for me, Stalin is the revolutionary. He didn't accept this contribution made by Gorbachev, Yeltsin.
Well, yeah, I mean, we could talk about this. I mean, in the West, usually when they refer to someone as a Stalinist, it's considered kind of a bad word. But to talk about the people who are in the KPRF right now, who don't, completely think, Stalin's a bad guy or whatever. I think it's safe to say there's like two kind of trends of this. There's people who in the late Soviet period, they were referring to like kind of red conservatives, people who were really, who had this idea about Stalin that like, the problems just need to be solved with, force. We got to just suppress these liberals, ban rock and roll and stuff, blah, blah, blah. But most of the people who don't denounce Stalin in the KPRF and in Russian society simply want to look at the period that in which Stalin was the general secretary and Stalin's legacy, Stalin's ideological writings, dialectically, look at it, have a fair assessment of what happened. He made many mistakes. There were also great achievements, like you said. Buildings like this. I mean, in Russia right now, it's become like it's really popular with generally rich people to get these apartments because they're so quality. They're made with so much quality. They're very beautiful, and they used to be available to working class people. And I mean, I don't live in one of these super nice Stalinist era apartments. I mean, there's different levels. There's the huge towers that were like beautiful. There's bigger buildings like the one I live in right now. It's like a 12 floor building with high ceilings and stuff. They're nice too. And they also had three-story Stalinist buildings at that time as well. But to get back to your question, basically being considered a Stalinist nowadays is just someone who doesn't think that Stalin is the Antichrist, Like Stalin was one of the first socialist revolutionaries. He was what many people in the late Soviet Union who were defending socialism, who didn't agree with perestroika and Gorbachev's policies, called him a trailblazer. You know, he was one of the first. He was like, and he was one of the experimental scientists of socialism, understanding how to with the Politburo of the party, understanding how to build socialism. And it's important to understand that mistakes were made, and also that there's a lot of propaganda around surrounding Stalin and this period as well right now, because obviously, you know, after Khrushchev came to power, like you said, the anti-party group was purged, and people came to power who were against these policies, which eventually, by the time of Gorbachev, led to an ideological degradation of the party. But it's undoubtable that under the leadership of Joseph Stalin in the Communist Party, many achievements were made, like industrialization of the country. Entire cities were built from nothing. I mean, the city of Magnitogorsk, it's in Siberia. It was a tundra before the industrialization program that took place in the 1930s, and now it's a major industrial city. You know, and it was part of this industrialization program that took place in the country over a span of 10 years. You know, collectivization, I think, is often very mischaracterized in bourgeois academia. I mean, people don't talk about the fact that there was a class of hyper-exploited poor peasants who made up the majority of the agricultural class in Russia, in the Soviet Union, that were being exploited by a class of kulaks. And collectivization actually, you know, collectivization stopped this. It turned farms into, you know, cooperatives actually, because collective farms. What many people have this incorrect understanding that collective farms are state-owned farms when the state dictates to you like how much you have to produce and everything. But actually, collective farms, the people on the farm collectively owned the tools, and they could sell the product that they had produced with their own collective efforts to the state. And this was actually much better than the system of kulaks, in which one person owned the farm and basically did little to no work and had, you know, migrant workers doing the actual work that was making him profit. This is an exploitative system. Collectivization also introduced technology to the agricultural system. I mean, part of the struggle of collectivization was not allowing kulaks and right-wing elements in agriculture to stop the introduction of technology that ended up, you know, revolutionizing agriculture. Despite the organizational inefficiencies at the time, because there were some. But I mean, we have to remember that there were no famines in the Soviet Union after collectivization, with the exception of the famine that followed World War II, which obviously was a result of the destruction of war. So this is stuff like, you know, that people have to take into account when talking about Stalin. I mean, of course, there were mistakes made as well. I mean, Yezhovshchina is another thing. You know, the repressions of the 1930s. This I think should have been handled by Stalin sooner. You know, like Yezhov was carrying out these mass repressions in a lot of ways unfairly, and this was going on without Stalin knowing about it, really. That's why he put Beria as the assistant to Yezhov to keep an eye on him, and they eventually discovered that Yezhov was carrying out mass repressions illegally. So, you know, it's a mixed bag. I mean, it's like how we have to look at the French Revolution and Robespierre, for example, from, you know, we have to see the good he did, the bad he did, and draw conclusions. You know, at the end of the day, the French Revolution was a great leap forward for society out of feudalism into capitalism, as was the Soviet Union. You know,
so you have a flag of the Eastern Germany, the German Democratic Republic, and in the subject of collectivization, it is very important because Poland was the one country in all these country socialist which didn't make collectivization. We have only 25% of the collectivization land, and it is why Poland was the one country here with the shortage of the products of the agriculture. So
Wow.
all the time they show in the propaganda media that in Polish shops they didn't have meat and any other stuff like this. But it is because in Poland they interested this private land, private kulaks in Poland, and in Germany they made collectivization, and then Eastern Germany they didn't have problem with shortage of the agriculture things.
Yeah, actually, they had East Germany had it was the country with some of the greatest availability of light industrial products in all of the Eastern Bloc.
Okay, I want to ask you about your videos, which you are said your talk with the old Russian who remember the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
they were very very trist, very very sad. Very, excuse me, because I am living in France and I sometimes I'm using French words.
Yeah, triste is also sad in Spanish.
Yes.
So I understand.
So this old man who was very very sad when he speak about Soviet Union, and my question is, what can you say to the leftist from the USA, all these leftist anti-Sovietic who were all the time they criticize Soviet Union, and when the Soviet Union collapsed, they are very happy and said, now we have democracy, now we can build our Trotsky sects in Russia or other countries. But this citizen of the Russia are sad. He was crying when he said about his motherland, which was collapsed.
I would say they don't know what they're talking about. I would say they don't know what they're talking about, because there's no way to defend what happened in the 1990s to anyone. I mean, nobody in Russia defends that except for super fringe, either crazy people or capitalists. Even the Putin's government right now, which I consider to be Bonapartist, attacks this period as something unacceptable. This was a terrible time when there was complete anarchy. Mobsters were killing people in the streets. The economy was in complete decline. I mean, people talk about stagnation under Brezhnev, economic stagnation under Brezhnev. It was nothing in comparison to the 1990s. The economy was still growing in the Soviet Union, even at the worst years of stagnation under Brezhnev. But in the 1990s, it was declining. And Western capitalists were in the country selling off the industry that the Soviet people had built over so many decades, selling it to the West for pennies on the dollar. I mean, there were people getting cheated out of their money because they had never come into contact with a Ponzi scheme or a pyramid scheme before. And some people had read on the internet about these things, that in the West, you could exploit people for their money using this. And it was absolute chaos. It was only after Putin came to power that the stuff was actually gotten under control. And also religious cults, another thing. Like you mentioned, the Trotskyists coming in to form their own sects. It's basically like the same thing. Religious churches all over the West, came to Russia to do the same exact thing, to exploit the weakness of Russia, to spread their own religious ideology. So this stuff really, I mean, everyone who lived in the Soviet Union doesn't like the 90s. They remember this as a terrible time. And the thing I've noticed in Russia specifically, and this is the funniest thing, because in the West, usually when people argue with communists who don't really know what they're talking about, they say, oh, you've never lived in a communist country. How could you know what it's like there? All these people come from, for example, I'm from America, so this is my experience. They say all these people have come from communist countries. They fled to America to seek a better life because life was terrible over there, blah, 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 blah. Obviously, they say this because they're obviously never going to come in contact with someone who didn't leave, which is the majority of the country, actually. These defectors are in a minority. And when you go to the places that actually had socialism, you realize that the older people, that actually lived in communism, that lived in socialism, are 10 times more supportive of the idea than the young people who actually never lived in it. It's the opposite in Russia that it is in the United States, where in the United States, young people are more inclined to socialism than the older people. In Russia, older people are more inclined to socialism than the younger people who believe more in capitalism. And I've noticed that of course, obviously, there's people still that say, you know, I hated living in the Soviet Union, blah, blah, blah. There's always going to be people like that in any demographic. But the older you get, the farther you go back. And this guy in the video that you're talking about, I can't remember his name right now, but he was at the end of the video talking about how he was from Ukraine. He was very old. I mean, he lived under the times of Stalin, you know, and he talked about how when he was a kid, his native village was burned to the ground by the Nazis. And those people actually tend to be the most supportive proponents of socialism. The people that actually lived in the time of Stalin, the people that actually lived in the 1960s, you know, even though there was de-Stalinization going on, there was still like a large, you know, socialist enthusiasm. De-Stalinization had not taken its full toll yet. People who lived in that time tend to be the most supportive of socialism. And the people I interviewed, aside from that last guy, the previous two before them, they were a bit younger. So they lived through the, you know, their idea of socialism was the Soviet Union under Brezhnev, basically. And they still had good, you know, they still had good associations with the Soviet Union. And I made it a point to interview people who were not political. You know, if you notice, these people were average people. I even asked them questions about politics. The first one specifically told me, you know, I never really bothered with politics. I'm just telling you how I felt my life was in the USSR. And, you know, she thought it was great. And so did the second woman. So, I mean, the woman said, you know, the second woman said there were economic difficulties, of course, but, you know, the 1990s was absolutely terrible, you know. And we heard the same thing from the last guy. So it's interesting. You know, the young people in Russia tend more to think that capitalism and business is the way forward, when in America, where we live in advanced capitalism, we realize it's the way backwards, you know. But of course, just like there are older people who say, oh, I didn't like the Soviet Union, I hated it, whatever. There are a lot of young people that are actually very inclined to socialism. And something I noticed, because as we were talking about the KPRF, I'm not a member of the KPRF, but I do attend their events often, and I have a lot of contacts there. What I've noticed is that 10 years ago, the KPRF had a reputation of being like the party of old people, the party of old people that lived in the USSR. Now, almost everyone I've been coming in contact with in the KPRF, young people. It's young. There's a huge new generation of young communists going to the KPRF, and I'm sure in other parties too, which is it's very good news to me, you know.
Okay, you said about this guy who was living in Ukraine, and his house was burning by the Nazis. And my question for you, what do you think about attitude of all these Eastern European countries, like Baltic states, like Ukraine, like Poland, when the collaborators of the Nazis, now they are the heroes? I can say you something about Poland. We have the terrorist, which name is the Żołnierze Wyklęci, the cursed soldiers. And in the time of 44, 50, they made the terrorist attacks. They killed more than 5,000 Poles. They killed especially the peasants who take a land from the land reform, and also they attacked the member of the parties, but they are coward. They didn't want to fight with the Polish army or Polish milice or the NKVD, so they attacked the people without arm. And now, in Poland, they are the heroes. And we have the situation in the Ukraine, when we have the cult of Bandera, we have the Baltic states, when the the collaborators of the SS are the heroes of these states. What do you think about this? Like a citizen of the America and Soviet Union fight with the Nazis in the time of the Second World War, and now these Nazi collaborators are the heroes.
Well, I think it's it's absolutely disgusting. I mean, that's the main thing I would say about it. And you're right. There's a cult of Bandera in Ukraine. I mean, neo-Nazis were an integral part of the Kiev government coming to power in 2014. I mean, in Belarus, the opposition protesters have been shamelessly using the flag that the Nazi collaborators were using at that time as well. I mean, in the Baltic states, you know, like they're run by governments that are absolutely rabidly anti-communist, anti-Russia, and a lot of these people who, you know, a lot of these people who have these views follow in the tradition of Nazi collaboration, and there's no reasoning with these people. I mean, there's this difference between people who have some sort of sympathy to the legacy of Nazi collaboration, and others who have, you know, sympathy for the history of communist liberation from the Nazis are never going to be able to talk out their feelings, you know. And this is why there's a border between Russia and countries that have NATO bases in their countries. You know, the Baltic states, Poland, Ukraine, they say that, oh, we hate Russia, it's an oppressive country, and they occupied us and blah blah blah. They're occupied right now by imperialists, you know, and the Soviet Union was not imperialist; they were anti-imperialist. And this is the thing that is just so crazy to me. I mean, on the subject of Americans right now supporting these governments, or the American government supporting these governments after they had fought the Nazis alongside the Soviets in World War II, is that I mean, if we look at who supported Hitler in the first place, it was Western capitalist corporations. I mean, the way I see it is that the UK and the United States had a policy of not getting involved. And the UK under Churchill was really hoping that Hitler and Stalin would destroy themselves. That's why before Stalin even signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, he had tried to make alliances with the Western powers time and time again. He was ready to form military alliances so that if Germany attacked the Soviet Union or attacked France or attacked anyone, all of Europe would be at war with Nazi Germany. And the Western powers refused, because they didn't want to be in an alliance with a communist country, not because, you know, they were accusing the Soviet Union of human rights abuses or whatever, but because it was a country that opposed the rule of profit. And that's the main thing. I mean, that's why Western corporations bankrolled Hitler and his campaign and supported his government up until they realized that their little experiment backfired on them. You know, and so I think the Western powers fought alongside the Soviet Union because they realized that Hitler wasn't interested in just destroying the Soviet Union. He was interested in carrying out the kind of colonialism that Britain was doing in Africa and India, for example. But Hitler was interested in doing that in Europe by settling, for example, sending settlers to Poland and displacing the Polish population. Sending settlers all over Europe to make it, you know, German land, Lebensraum. And for the Western imperialist powers, you know, it was only unacceptable because now all of a sudden Hitler's saying, I'm going to do colonial policies in Europe. That was the line crossing for them, you know. And of course, once the United States was attacked by Japan, Japan and Germany had a military alliance, so America was, you know, dragged into the war as well. But I don't think it was because of any, you know, particular particular friendship with the Soviet Union. I think Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted to pursue a more neutral policy with the Soviet Union. I think Franklin Delano Roosevelt really believed in, peaceful coexistence with the Soviet Union and actually negotiating on friendly terms with Stalin. But once he died and Truman came to power, Truman was a complete imperialist. I mean, he was the guy that gave the okay to drop nuclear weapons on entire cities in Japan and kill hundreds of thousands of civilians, and after that, he didn't even want to deal with Stalin. That was when the Cold War began, and Truman was, making it clear we are going to be a very militaristic imperialist power. So I think it's there's no contradiction with the government right now supporting the neo-Nazis in Eastern Europe, because it supports their agenda of imperialism.
Okay, now I want to ask you some questions about Poland. I know that you have made interview with the members of the Polish Communist Party. First question: Did you heard about the women's strikes?
The women's strikes in Poland?
Yes.
I heard that there were women's protests against the cracking down on abortion rights in the country. But other than that, I don't know.
So it was in 22 of the October, and in October and November we have big demonstrations in Poland. Now we have demonstrations, but they are not very big. And in November we have many examples of the hard repression of the police contre les femmes. For example, there was a situation when the anti-terrorist was beating the young woman, 17-year-old, with the metal sticks, and also they use the paper gas for all these women, because this demonstration is mostly of the women. But you, like journalist, did you ever heard that in any country, in any demonstration, that the anti-terrorists which have to use to fight with the terrorists, with arms, with bombs, had you heard about situation that in the political demonstration anti-terrorists are using for the repression like this?
Actually, no, I haven't. That sounds very what we call overkill. I mean, usually in the United States, if there's a protest, that gets out of hand, for example, we can use the storming of the Capitol building in Washington. They deploy the National Guard. That's usually what the decision is. If the police can't handle it, they send in the internal military. But anti-terrorism, I mean, that's a different story, right? All of a sudden, the government is treating people who decide to go out into the street to protest for their rights as terrorists. And to be honest, it's sick. But in the United States, it also seems like it could be going in that direction as well. Because on that note, the people who, I mean, I don't have any specific alliance to the people that stormed the Capitol. I don't have any sympathy for them or whatever. But the Trump supporters who stormed the Capitol building, the FBI put them on no-fly terrorist lists. And I think that is a little overkill. That's kind of that's a similar thing. I mean, these people weren't bombing the Capitol building. They, there was a radical fraction of a protest that was going on, and they're considered now domestic terrorists. So I think it's part of a larger trend in the West, though. I mean, these countries that are considered democracies, they're called democracies all the time. We're told over and over we live in a democracy, are becoming only more and more authoritarian as they begin to realize that their society, is still under threat. I mean, the society is under threat mostly by itself, by the internal contradictions of the capitalist system that are perpetuating the problems we're seeing today. So
Yes, and I want to ask you also about all this anti-communist law which is in Poland, that it ban hammer and sickle and others symbols of the communism. You know America, you know Russia. I suppose that you know also other countries. Did you ever saw things like this, that the hammer and sickle is banned and somebody who use it can go to prison?
Well, the only time that that reminds me of, the only thing that comes to mind is back in United States history when we had the McCarthy era. I mean, under Eisenhower, who came after Truman, who was the president after Truman, he actually passed a law that banned all communist parties. That actually has never been revoked to this day, but is never really used. I mean, except for this, except for, I guess it was, utilized upon when McCarthy was, when the McCarthy era was going on, when anyone accused of being a communist or anything could lose his job and be thrown in prison. And this went on for a little while, of course, until McCarthy started accusing people that were more powerful than he was, and they put an end to it. But that's what it reminds me of, to be honest, this McCarthyist kind of anti-communist purges. And one of the things that the people I interviewed in the Polish Communist Party said was that they don't really know why the government is doing this right now, because the Polish Communist Party isn't even really a powerful force in the country. It's not like the government's doing it because they're afraid that the Polish Communist Party is going to take control of the government tomorrow. It's really, I think it's a lot less concerned with some sort of imminent threat to the government, a lot more concerned with controlling people's minds, controlling the historical narrative. And this has a lot more to do with Poland's foreign policy than it does with its domestic policy, because if they can control the narrative of World War II and make the Soviet Union look like some sort of military occupier instead of a liberator from the Nazis, then they can convince their population that Russia is the contemporary bad guy. It's the same thing in the United States. We're still living in Cold War mentality in the United States. When in Russia, what I realized is that people are not living in that mentality. They're trying to get past Cold War mentality, and it's just not working because the people in the West are still living in it because of the governments. They still want Russia to be the enemy. There's a lot of people in the United States, that if they don't know anything about politics, if they, are completely disassociated with all this stuff, they might think that Russia is still communist. I've heard people say that Vladimir Putin's a communist because they just don't know anything about the situation, which they're not at fault for it. I think it's the fault of society for not better educating people. But, it's Cold War mentality.
Yes, you have to understand that Poland is the strange country, that we have anti-Semitism without Jews. We have hate to the Islam without Islamic people. We have the hate to communism, but without communists. I agree with you that Communist Party of Poland is small and weak, and it is why we are building our party, the Polish Workers' Party. But it is other story. So I want to ask you about the situation which is now in Russia, about the demonstration to support the Navalny. So what do you think about Navalny, and what do you think about this protest? I read one article in the Trotskyist site internet, which they said that they don't support Navalny because he is liberal and stuff like this, but the people who protest, this is mass movement, and now in the last times, the politic of the Putin and all this government of Russia, they support oligarchy. They wanted to make the age of the pensions bigger. They now in the time of the crisis, they cut the budget of the hospitals, and in the same time they make bigger the budget of the police. And people who demonstrate, they are not for liberal Navalny, but they don't want this oligarchic system which is in Russia. So I don't know what is the situation on Russia, and I don't have confiance with every colored revolution. When I heard colored revolution, I think that if CIA supports something, I am against. But I want to know what is your position.
Well, first, I'll just start with this example that you gave of the Trotskyist position is the typical Trotskyist position of being a useful idiot. You know, like I mean, these protests, whoever goes to these protests, they're serving the political agenda of Alexei Navalny, who is a liberal capitalist, described himself as a market fundamentalist when asked about his political views. Doesn't matter who's going to these protests, they're serving his political agenda. Now, what they're saying about people being in the protests who have legitimate grievances with the economic conditions of Russia right now, or political conditions, or with this or that law, or aren't satisfied with the quality of life they're living in. There's tons of people in the protests who are there because of that, who have never heard of maybe Alexei Navalny before, or maybe they have, but they don't even know what he stands for, but they are in these protests because of this. Now, this doesn't mean that we should support the protests, because this Alexei Navalny is using this for his own political agenda, which in the end, if is successful, will be a return to the 1990s. It's going to be, I mean, his policies are completely pro-Western, liberal, market fundamentalism in the United States, in Russia, sorry. And, you know, he would let in people like Bill Browder, who can't go to Russia right now because they're facing charges of tax fraud from stealing from the people in the 1990s. You know, those people would have they would be let back to keep doing what they were doing in the 1990s, making tons of money while other people were suffering, you know. And, you know, I could say in short a little bit about Alexei Navalny, but of course, if people watching this video want to get a huge big picture, they could watch my 1 hour live about it. But basically, he is some sort of ultra nationalist who, at the same time, got training alongside other people who participated in color revolutions at Yale University in 2010. He was trained alongside these people, not only alongside color revolutionaries, but alongside people who I mentioned in my video. One guy was a former Mujahideen fighter in Afghanistan who fought against the Soviets. I mean, another one was some sort of J.P. Morgan philanthropist working in Southeast Asia. I mean, these are people who serve the foreign policy agenda of the United States, and it's very clear. I mean, this program that Navalny participated in, that all these people participate in, it's a fully all-inclusive, paid-for program, which costs like $30,000 per person. This is where they make connections to people in the U.S. government and go back to their countries and participate in revolutions to overthrow the enemies of the United States. And there's no doubt that the United States has been, and not just the United States, the West in general, they've had a hand in these protests. I mean, the most recent example was that several foreign diplomats, I think it was from Sweden, if I remember correctly, and two others, I can't remember exactly the countries, but you could look it up online, about foreign diplomats being arrested in Russia because of their participation in the protests here. They were participating, the foreign diplomats participating in the protests against the Russian government that are unsanctioned. They're illegal protests because they're not. They don't tell the government in advance where they're happening. They're not registered, and this is, you know, obviously this is the point. Navalny's camp wants to create chaos to put pressure on the Russian government. But another thing is that the United States embassy in Russia published the locations and times of these protests that were going to take place that were unsanctioned, that were not public information. So it's clear that the Navalny camp has been communicating with the American embassy in Russia, that they're doing some sort of collaborating. And this became known because the Russian Foreign Ministry released a report about it. And again, you could watch my video on the subject about it. You could find that information on the internet. So it's clear that the United States has a hand in this. And it wouldn't be this. It's never the other way around. I mean, was Russia meddling in American affairs when the Capitol was stormed by Trump supporters? Was the Russian embassy telling the protesters, okay, yeah, like you go to this place, create some chaos? Were the Russian diplomats storming the Capitol with these people? No. Russia doesn't do that. The United States does that, and Navalny is a perfect example. And this was all orchestrated as well. I mean, he purposely skipped the probation on his sentence that got him arrested. He purposely came back to Russia to get arrested. He purposely released this video about Putin's palace at the same time that he was going back to Russia. That required, I mean, it was a very detailed video. It required like 6 months to a year of research. It was no accident that it happened at the same time that he was coming back to get arrested. And this created, obviously, an explosion of media attention in the Russian opposition media and Western media, especially because of his accusations that he was poisoned by the Russian government, which I also think is not true. But yeah.
And could you say something about position Navalny through the immigrants? Because I heard that he organized in Moscow demonstrations against the workers from the Islamic south of the Russia, and it is strange for me because this position is similar to Marine Le Pen, for example.
Yeah,
and he is used by the liberal propaganda in the West, while the democratic hero who wanted to get out all the Muslims from the Moscow.
Yeah, actually, thank you for reminding me about this. Something I forgot to mention that I also talked a little bit about in my video. But this is a great point. Before 2013, for some reason in 2013, Navalny kind of changed his political image as some general guy who doesn't like the government. He's opposition guy. But before that, he was an ultranationalist. And he was actually a member of the Yabloko party in Russia, which is a pretty center-liberal party, and was kicked out because of his ultranationalist views. He said Russia needs to stop feeding the Caucasus, which is absolute nonsense, because the Caucasus, after the fall of the Soviet Union, got the short end of the stick. You know, those places are impoverished in comparison to in the Soviet Union, when capital around the country was more equally distributed. Now, everyone, a lot of people from those ex-Soviet republics are trying to go to Russia, and they're trying to go to Moscow, because, in this capitalist situation now, capital is centralizing in Russia. But he said that he did another video comparing militants in Chechnya, or I guess Chechen people in general, to cockroaches. He did a political advertisement where he basically said, like, well, if you have a cockroach problem, you would use a fly swatter to kill it, right? Well, if you have these people, why wouldn't you use a gun? And this got huge attention. He got a lot of negative attention for it, and you could still find that video on his YouTube channel. Actually, if you go, he uses a different YouTube channel now. But if you look up Alexei Navalny, he has like around 8,000 to 9,000 subscribers. You can still find that video, and it's very clear what was going on. And the last thing I should say about it is, he hasn't used that kind of rhetoric in a long time. So you might think, maybe he's changed his mind. Maybe he thought he was wrong. But actually, in 2020, he did an interview with Der Spiegel where they asked him about this. They asked him if he changed his mind about his ultranationalist views. He said, "I still have the same ideas as I first had when I came into politics." So there you go. I mean, it's obviously, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on with the Navalny camp, and it's clear that after 2010, he learned how to organize more effectively, and he learned that he has to tone down some of his more crazy ideas so that he can get more broad support if he wants to overthrow the government in Russia, you know.
Okay, and what is your predictions for the next 5 months? Because in my perspective, I see that the Putin are losers. That all these things which he made are against him. So firstly, they made all this hysteria that Navalny was poisoned. And they repeat this, and also they repeat that somebody was poisoned all the time. They said that Assad was poisoned his citizens in Syria. That this agent in London also was poisoned. So they can use this hysteria that somebody was poisoned all the time. But it was after this he was arrested. So they started that it is dictator. The political opponent was arrested, and now they said that you have this video about this palace of the Putin, and also we have 5,000 people which are arrested. So I saw this, that somebody prepare a scenario. And all these things which they wanted to do, the Russians don't know how to stop it. That they are playing game with the Russian government, and Russian government is losing. So how it is happened? How it will be end? What do you think?
Well, the good thing about the situation, I think, is that well, the bad thing, obviously, is that Alexei Navalny has gotten a lot of attention because of this. Like you said, I mean, he did this collaboration with Bellingcat and Western media to get this fake telephone call with an FSB agent who apparently admitted to poisoning him and all this stuff. This was big propaganda in the West. But I can tell you that in Russia, this kind of propaganda does not have that much of an effect. I mean, people in the West are clearly convinced, because they're not hearing the other side. But when people in Russia were reading this, seeing this conversation between Navalny and this FSB agent, I mean, it looked so fake. And it really, I mean, like anyone who I mean, think about it logically for a second. Like, I mean, what FSB agent who, according to Bellingcat and the Western media, is a member of a top secret chemical weapons department of the FSB, would casually talk to someone he's not sure about the identity of on the phone for 45 minutes and admit that he poisoned him? I mean, it's absurd. Is Russia like a terrible authoritarian country where you have no freedom of speech and can't do anything? Or is it like a country of idiots that are, big bureaucracy that can't get anything done? It's one or the other, depending on what the West wants its narrative to be. And, so this kind of stuff doesn't really have that much of an effect on the Russian population, actually. And these protests definitely have been big. I think they've been bigger than I've seen ever since my time here. I've been living here for 3 years, but I did also watch the protests against Putin's re-election in the mid-2010s. I think it was 2014. I can't remember. Maybe it was 2015, 2016. They were these are the biggest protests since then. And still, I don't think they're that big of a threat to Putin's government. Actually, since last weekend, the protests have actually fizzled out very much. We've seen Putin's approval rating take a hit because of this, but the protests have taken a big hit in terms of how many people are attending them. And the Navalny camp has, at first promised they were going to have big protests every weekend and all this, but it's already dying out, actually. And I think it's already showing itself to be even less successful than the protests in Belarus, that were very strong, going on for quite a while. I mean, maybe they're still going on. Who knows? Because I still follow the opposition next Telegram channel to see what's going on with them, and it seems like stuff's still going on, but it's not, it's not making any difference. It's not getting attention from the media anymore, and this stuff is going down the drain in a faster way in Russia, and yeah, so.
So in the end, I would like to ask you, what is your project for the communism for the next years? That do you think that you want to build the party? You want to be a member of the party? Which party? Do you think that with all the censorship which is now in the social media, that our propaganda, it's because in the USA is starting to close the socialist website, socialist other channels. So what do you think is this crisis, which is now economic crisis, can be used by us, by the communist movement, or to construct? Because in Poland we don't have communist movement. We have individuals who want to construct, but we are very, very weak. But I think that in other countries also, in USA, they are leftists, but they are not communists. They are not revolutionaries for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, as a Marxist-Leninist, I mean, anyone who watches my YouTube channel knows I'm a Marxist-Leninist. I mean, I believe that, it's necessary to build a vanguard party, a grassroots vanguard party with its power based in the working class and workers' organizations to, take power and create a socialist society. But this is, in the United States, our biggest problem basically is just people can't unite. There's a lot of bickering, a lot of individuals, like you said, that aren't members of parties, which I'm one of them. I think for right now, I think I'm trying to do as much as I can on my own and learn as much as I can on my own. I'm only 25, so I don't think I was a member of the Socialist Alternative Trotskyist Party when I was like 17, and I quit because I realized that there are some major flaws in the currently accepted idea of what the party is supposed to do. We have a lot of communist parties, but they're not vanguard parties. They're more on the Menshevik model that existed in around the early 20th century of mass organization and everything. They're very disorganized. They're not really going to the working class. The real working class in the United States are the people who ended up supporting Trump, and none of the left in the United States want to go to these people. In Russia, there's a huge communist movement in comparison to in the United States. And I think the KPRF still has a lot of political power. The problem is that right now that they're so under threat by U.S. imperialism, like their line is to, align themselves with the national forces against the foreign imperialists, which I don't know. I don't think me trying to organize another party is going to solve anything, because there's a bunch of people who have done that, and I don't count myself as much smarter than anyone else who's tried it before. I think what really needs to be done is to put together some sort of international, or in my case in the United States, maybe a federation of socialist groups, get all of these people who actually believe in the construction of a vanguard party and this kind of Marxist-Leninist idea of how to build power, get them all to sit together and create new theses for the 21st century of what needs to be done. Because obviously the theories of Marx about capitalism and Lenin's theories about imperialism, they're still relevant, of course. But the material conditions in which we're living right now under neoliberalism are also very different from that time period. I mean, the fundamentals of Marxism and Leninism are still relevant, but we need to we need to have you know, we need to have a consensus in the American left and the international left about how we can use these fundamental principles about our current society productively and how to use them for our current situation. And that we don't have. That we don't have. Because I think a lot of in the United States at least, a lot of people are more concerned with arguing amongst themselves. And it's important, of course, but, you know, because arguing is how you get to come to conclusions. But it seems like the left is more interested in fighting itself than the actual bourgeoisie. But there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, one of which we could have a whole discussion on that. One of which is that the Democratic Party in the United States and liberals have co-opted leftist ideas, and they've created a situation in which many leftists are supporting the bourgeoisie. You know, I think DSA in the United States, you know, their idea is to take power through taking the Democratic Party to the left. But it's a bourgeois party. It's controlled, you know, it's controlled by the capitalist class, the richest capitalists of the United States, when the Republican Party is actually controlled by the less rich capitalists of the United States. I mean, they decide which candidates you get to choose from before the primary elections even happen. It's not possible to change those parties from within, you know.
It is bourgeois party but built by the slave owners.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you think that this arguing, for example, about the LGBT question, it is something which is made by the left, or somebody, maybe FBI or police politic, wants to help to leftists in the Western countries to argue all the time that because when I try build something, and every time when we are more than 10 and they are split, they are arguing about I think that somebody wants to that we can't unite.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the main issue with that is basically the long trend that happened throughout the 20th century of the kind of degeneration of Marxist analysis of the current conditions of the world because of people with middle class understandings of what Marxism and socialism actually are. You know, we've forgotten that the core of it is class struggle. This is something that is this is the core of all of these problems, you know. And you know, I think gay people and trans people and all of them should be treated with respect just like anyone else. But we have a limited amount of effort. You know, humans have limited amounts of efforts, and the focus of our political efforts needs to be on the core of the problem, which is the class struggle. We can't solve all the you know, the problems that arise from the economic contradictions of capitalist society before we change the economic conditions themselves. You know, this is like, you know, the best example is when we saw the Russian the Russian, sorry, it's called the Russian Tsar, the Russian Empire. That's what I was looking for. When we saw the Russian Empire change into the Soviet Union, the classes were, you know, turned on their head. The proletariat took power, and women were given the right to vote. Women were given the right to abortion. All these rights were put forward. Hospitals were being built. All this stuff, you know, that happens after the socialist society is created, because otherwise these are just going to become concessions that the capitalist class gives when it feels that it's under threat, you know.
Okay, thank you, comrade, for your time. It was very interesting discussion for me, and I hope that these things which you said, that the Marxists from all the world have to unite to talk about the future, about the new thesis. It is very, very important. If you organize meeting like this, I can go there with my comrades. We also want to.
It would be excellent.
Yes, participate in the creation of the new communist movement.
Yeah, it would be great. It was my pleasure having this discussion with you. I thought it was very good and lively, and I hope we have many other good ones in the future on new topics.
I am ready for this. So if
Great.
you want to have contact with the Polish comrades, we are not many. We are not many, but we are open for the construct relations with the comrades from all the world.
Great, great, and I could introduce you guys to some people from the KPRF as well. We've done that already with American comrades. So
I am ready, and I published some translation of the KPRF. Because in my Polish channel there are 2,000 movies. It's enormous. It's big, and I published interview with the guy. Come on, his name is the latest candidate of the KPRF.
You're talking about
not Zyuganov.
No,
the younger one.
Who had the farm, the Lenin collective farm. I forgot his name.
Yes, I also.
Gruzinian.
Yes. So I made video. We put this video and translate to Polish, and other video like this, I think. So we try to have contact with the Russia, because я выучился русского языка, потому что на этом языке разговаривал Ленин.
Да.
Да. Ты знаешь, это стих до Маяковского.
Да, конечно. Я обожаю Маяковского. Может быть, в будущем мы будем провожать интервью по-русски, может быть.
Да, я по-русски тоже могу говорить. Для меня никакого проблема. Но я немножко забыл, потому что раньше я говорю... Мой русский раньше, 10 лет тому назад, моя учительница говорила, что он очень хороший. Сейчас я забыл, потому что я не говорю на этом языке.
Но мы сможем практиковать.
Вот. Привет, камарады. До встречи. Всего хорошего.
До встречи.